It was the kind of night that made you wonder if the basketball court was just a stage for a one-man circus, and Dennis Rodman was the ringmaster, the clown, and the lion tamer all rolled into one. The Chicago Bulls were playing the Utah Jazz in the NBA Finals, and the world was watching, not just for the game, but for the man with the rainbow hair, the tattoos, and the energy that seemed to zap through the air like static electricity. He was not the star player, not the MVP, not the one taking the last shot. Dennis Rodman was something else entirely. He was the guy who could disappear into a sea of taller, faster, stronger athletes and emerge with the ball, almost as if he had willed it into his hands. He was a human magnet, a sorcerer of the boards, and a master of making his opponents lose their cool, their focus, and sometimes their dignity. That night, he dove for a loose ball, his body parallel to the floor, his hair a flash of blue and pink, and he wrapped his arms around the leather sphere like it was the only thing that mattered in the universe. He crashed into the cameraman, tumbled over the sideline, and as he got up, he grinned that wild, unfiltered grin, the one that said he was having the time of his life. That was Dennis Rodman. But the story of how he got there, how a troubled kid from a broken home became the most famous rebounder in NBA history, is a story that starts way before the lights of the finals, before the tattoos, before the headlines that screamed about his weddings, his nights out with Madonna, and his trips to North Korea. It starts in a place where nobody imagined he would ever be anything but invisible. Dennis Keith Rodman was born on May 13, 1961, in Trenton, New Jersey. His father, Philander Rodman Jr., was an Air Force man who was rarely around, and when Dennis was just a few years old, his father simply left, never to return. His mother, Shirley, was left to raise Dennis and his two younger sisters, Deborah and Kim, on her own. The family moved to a housing project in Dallas, Texas, where poverty was a constant companion and hope was a luxury they could not afford. Shirley worked multiple jobs, sometimes as a waitress, sometimes cleaning houses, trying to put food on the table and keep a roof over their heads. But the strain was enormous. Dennis later described his childhood as lonely and isolated. He was a quiet, awkward kid, the kind who sat in the back of the classroom and tried not to be noticed. He was tall and gangly, but not athletic in the way that kids often were. He felt clumsy, out of place. He was the one who got teased for his height, for his shyness, for the way his clothes were always a little too worn. He did not play basketball. He did not dream of the NBA. In fact, he barely dreamed at all. He spent most of his time in his own head imagining ways to disappear. But as he grew, something shifted. In high school, he hit a growth spurt and shot up to 6 feet 7 inches, but even then he did not play organized basketball. He was too shy, too unsure of himself. He was also struggling academically. He had trouble reading and writing, and he was labeled as slow. In truth, he was likely dyslexic, but that was not something anyone diagnosed back then, especially not for a poor black kid in Texas. School was a place of failure, and he dropped out. He worked odd jobs, pumping gas, cleaning cars, doing whatever he could to bring in a few dollars. He was on a path that led nowhere, a path of minimum wage and maximum struggle. It was not until he was 18, after a growth spurt that pushed him to 6 feet 8 inches, that he was convinced by a friend to try out for the basketball team at a local junior college. It was a random shot, an accident of timing and location. He had no skills, no training, no understanding of the game, but he was tall, and tall people who could run and jump had a place on a basketball court. He made the team, and for the first time in his life he felt something click. It was not love at first sight. It was more like a strange, unexpected recognition. He discovered that when he focused on one thing, on the ball, on the rim, on the opponent, he could block out everything else. The noise of his life, the pain of his past, the uncertainty of his future, all of it faded away. He ended up at Southeastern Oklahoma State University, a small NAIA school where he was finally able to develop his game. Coaches saw something in him, that raw, untamed energy, that willingness to sacrifice his body, that uncanny ability to read the flight of a missed shot. He was not a scorer. He rarely took jump shots, but he could rebound like nobody else. He had a feel for where the ball would go, a sixth sense for the arc and the spin, and he would attack the glass with a fury that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. He led the nation in rebounding twice, and by the time he graduated, he was on the radar of NBA scouts. But he was still an enigma. Teams wondered if a guy with his background, his lack of polished skills, his strange personality, could make it in the pros. Nonetheless, the Detroit Pistons took a chance on him, selecting him with the 27th pick in the second round of the 1986 draft. It was a low pick, the kind of pick that often produces benchwarmers and short careers. Nobody thought Dennis Rodman would become a legend, but the Pistons were building something special. They were coached by Chuck Daly, a man with a sharp mind and a cool demeanor, and they had a core of players who were rough, tough, and unapologetically mean. Isaiah Thomas, Joe Dumars, Bill Laimbeer, Rick Mahorn. They were the bad boys, a team that played defense like it was a street fight, that pushed and shoved and elbowed their way to championships. And Dennis Rodman fit right in. He was not mean in the same way as Laimbeer, who would foul a man with a smile. Rodman was mean in a different way. He was relentless. He would chase after every loose ball, battle for every rebound, and guard the other team's best player with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He did not care about scoring. He did not care about glory. He cared about winning, and he cared about proving he belonged. In his first few seasons, he learned the game from the bench, watching and absorbing. But by his third season, he was starting, and the Pistons were becoming a dynasty. In 1989 and 1990, they won back-to-back NBA championships, and Rodman was a key part of that success. He led the league in rebounding. He was named Defensive Player of the Year, and he earned a reputation as the best defender in the game. He could guard anyone from point guards to centers, and he would get inside their heads, talk to them, taunt them, break their concentration. He was a master of psychological warfare. But off the court, Dennis Rodman was lost. The same focus that made him great on the court left him empty when the game ended. He did not have a hobby, a family life, a sense of self outside of basketball. He started going out, partying, drinking. He met a woman named Annie Bakes and they got married, but the marriage was a disaster. He was not ready to be a husband. He was not ready for anything except the next rebound. The relationship fell apart and he fell into a deep depression. He would sit alone in his apartment, staring at the walls, wondering what was the point. He later revealed that he attempted suicide, that he drove to a park and sat there with a gun in his hand, ready to end it all. But something stopped him. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was a faint glimmer of hope. He put the gun down and drove home. He knew he needed help. He started seeing a therapist. He started to understand that his wild behavior, his need for chaos, was a way of covering up a deeper pain. But that understanding did not make the pain go away. It only made him more aware of it. When the Pistons' dynasty began to fade, the team decided to trade him. In 1993, he was sent to the San Antonio Spurs, a team that had no idea what they were getting. At first, it seemed like a good fit. The Spurs had David Robinson, a quiet, disciplined superstar, and they needed a rebounder and defender to complement him. But Rodman was changing. He started experimenting with his appearance, dyeing his hair bright colors, wearing earrings, getting tattoos. He was becoming a character, a spectacle, and the Spurs were not amused. They wanted him to be a professional, to act like a normal player. But Rodman had never been normal, and he was not about to start. He clashed with Coach Bob Hill. He showed up late to practices. He got into arguments with management. And after a season and a half, the Spurs had had enough. They traded him to the Chicago Bulls, a team that was already a dynasty, already led by Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. The move was seen as a gamble. How could a man so unpredictable, so wild, coexist with a perfectionist like Michael Jordan? But Phil Jackson, the Bulls' coach, had a plan. Jackson was a former hippie, a Zen master, a man who understood that the mind is just as important as the body. He knew that Rodman was not a bad person. He was a wounded person. He needed to be accepted, understood, and given a role where his eccentricities could be an asset, not a liability. Jackson created an environment where Rodman could be himself. He allowed him to skip morning practices if he needed rest. He did not force him to dress in suits for road games. He let him be the Dennis Rodman that the world would come to know. On the court, Rodman was given one job: get every rebound, guard the other team's best player, and bring an energy that would electrify the arena. And that is exactly what he did. The Bulls won 3 straight championships from 1996 to 1998, and Rodman was the engine of their defense. He led the league in rebounding for 7 straight seasons, a feat that had never been done before and has not been done since. He was named to the All-Defensive Team year after year. And he became a global icon, a man whose face was as recognizable as Jordan's, even if for very different reasons. But the headlines were not about his rebounding. The headlines were about his weddings. He married himself, yes. He wore a wedding dress and claimed to have married himself as a protest against society's expectations. He dated Madonna, the biggest pop star in the world, and the tabloids went crazy. He told stories of their wild nights together, of how she wanted to have his child, of how he broke her heart. He got into fights, got kicked out of games, and was suspended multiple times. He seemed to be living a life that was 100 miles an hour, a life that was constantly on the edge of falling apart. And yet, every night when the game started, he was the same player. He was the same man who had been invisible as a child, who had felt worthless, who had almost ended his own life. He used the chaos to feed his focus. He used the attention to hide his fear, and he kept on rebounding. The story of Dennis Rodman is not just a sports story. It is a story about survival, about finding a place in a world that tells you that you do not belong. It is a story about how a man can take his brokenness and turn it into a superpower. But it is also a story about loneliness, about the moments when the lights go down and the cameras stop flashing, and he is left alone with himself, the same shy, awkward kid from the housing project in Dallas. That is the part that few people saw. That is the part that the headlines never captured. And that is where we will go next, deeper into the shadows behind the spectacle, to understand the wild rebound king, not as a joke, not as a freak, but as a human being who somehow, against all odds, learned to fly. The Bulls' dynasty ended in the summer of 1998, when Michael Jordan retired for the second time, Scottie Pippen was traded, and Phil Jackson stepped away to recharge. Dennis Rodman was 37 years old, a free agent, and the team that had embraced him no longer existed. He could have walked away then, could have ridden off into the sunset with 3 more rings and a legacy as the greatest rebounder and defender of his generation. But walking away was never his style. He signed with the Los Angeles Lakers, a team that was desperate for a spark, desperate for someone to fill the void left by Shaquille O'Neal's departure and the lingering shadow of Magic Johnson's retirement. The Lakers had Kobe Bryant, young and hungry, and they had a roster full of stars who needed a glue guy, a dirty worker, a man who would do the things nobody else wanted to do. On paper, it made sense. In reality, it was a disaster waiting to happen. Rodman arrived in Los Angeles with all the baggage he had carried for years, now heavier than ever. He was still partying, still drinking, still living a life that was spinning faster and faster. The Lakers were a glamour franchise, a team that expected its players to be polished, media-savvy, and professional. Rodman was none of those things. He showed up late to practice, missed team meetings, and clashed with coach Del Harris, a man who had no patience for eccentricity. The chemistry that had worked in Chicago, where Phil Jackson had created a bubble of acceptance, was nowhere to be found in LA. Rodman played 23 games for the Lakers, averaging a modest 2 rebounds per game, a far cry from the monster numbers he had posted just a season earlier. He was suspended, fined, and eventually waived. The experiment was over. The headlines screamed that Dennis Rodman was washed up, that his career was finished, that the wild man had finally burned out. But he did not believe it. He still had fight in him, still had that desperate hunger to prove that he belonged. In early 1999, he signed with the Dallas Mavericks, a team that was young and rebuilding, a team that hoped Rodman could provide veteran leadership and a hard edge. The Mavericks were owned by Mark Cuban, a brash billionaire who loved the spotlight almost as much as Rodman did. Cuban saw Rodman as a draw, a character who would sell tickets and generate buzz. He was not wrong, but once again, the on-court product was a mess. Rodman played only 12 games for the Mavericks, and his behavior was even more erratic than before. He skipped practice, got into arguments with coaches, and was eventually suspended indefinitely. The Mavericks cut him loose, and this time it really seemed like the end. No team wanted to take a chance on a 40-year-old rebounder who could no longer dominate physically and whose mind seemed to be unraveling in plain sight. And so Dennis Rodman disappeared from the NBA, not with a bang, but with a whimper. He did not announce his retirement. He did not hold a press conference. He simply stopped showing up, stopped answering calls, stopped being part of the league that had made him famous. For the first time since he was a teenager, he had no structure, no routine, no game to prepare for. He was adrift. He traveled around the world, going to parties, appearing at events, doing whatever he could to stay in the public eye. He became a professional wrestler for a brief stint, joining the WCW and getting into the ring with Hulk Hogan and other giants. It was a spectacle, a sideshow, and Rodman played his role perfectly. He wore outrageous costumes, insulted the crowd, and took bumps that would have broken a lesser man. But even that was not enough to fill the void. The wrestling gig ended after a few months, and he was left with nothing but the noise in his head. He tried acting, appearing in low-budget films and television shows. He wrote an autobiography, Bad as I Wanna Be, which became a bestseller and introduced the world to a version of Dennis Rodman that was part truth, part performance. He talked openly about his struggles, his childhood, his suicide attempt. He seemed to be finally willing to let people see the cracks in the armor, but the performance was still there. He would say something deeply personal, then crack a joke, then pick a fight with a reporter. He was still controlling the narrative, still hiding behind the mask. The mask was just more colorful now. In the early 2000s, Rodman found himself in a new kind of spotlight, one that had nothing to do with basketball. He was invited to appear on reality television shows, first on Celebrity Boot Camp, then on The Surreal Life, and later on Big Brother in the United Kingdom. These shows were designed to capture the drama of famous people living together in a confined space, and Rodman was a master at creating drama. He would argue, he would flirt, he would reveal secrets, he would storm off in a huff. The producers loved him because he never gave them a quiet moment. The viewers loved him because he was unpredictable, dangerous, and honest in the most unsettling way. But behind the scenes, the same loneliness was there. He would stay up late after the cameras stopped rolling, drinking alone in his room, talking to himself, wondering if anyone really saw him. It was during this period that he began to build a curious relationship with the country of North Korea. It started as a publicity stunt, a way to generate headlines and maybe make some money. He was invited to visit Pyongyang by a promoter who knew that Rodman's personality would clash with the rigid state-controlled culture of the most isolated nation on Earth. But when Rodman arrived, he was surprised by what he found. He met Kim Jong-il, the leader of the country at the time. And later, after Kim Jong-il died, he met his son, Kim Jong-un. Rodman described these encounters in terms that were almost intimate, almost tender. He said that Kim Jong-un was a friend, a good man, a basketball fan who knew more about the NBA than most Americans. Rodman visited North Korea multiple times, playing exhibition games, singing karaoke, and posing for photos. The world was horrified. How could a former NBA star, an American icon, be buddy-buddy with a dictator who starved his people and threatened nuclear war? But Rodman did not care. He said that he was a peacemaker, that he was building bridges, that he could see the humanity in Kim Jong-un when nobody else could. And maybe he believed it. Or maybe he just needed a place where he was welcome, where he was not judged, where the chaos of his own life was mirrored by the chaos of a nation living under a cult of personality. The criticism was fierce. Journalists called him a traitor, a fool, a clown. Human rights groups condemned him. Former teammates kept their distance. But Rodman kept returning to North Korea, each time with a bigger smile and a louder outfit. He wore a t-shirt with Kim Jong-un's face on it. He sang "Happy Birthday" to the dictator on his birthday. He cried on camera, saying that he loved the country and its people. It was impossible to tell whether it was genuine affection, a cry for attention, or a slow-motion breakdown. Probably it was all three. Meanwhile, his own health was deteriorating. He had been diagnosed with multiple health problems, including high blood pressure and joint issues. He was in and out of rehab for alcohol abuse. He was arrested for driving under the influence. He had a string of relationships that ended badly, leaving him more isolated each time. He had 2 children, a son and a daughter, but he was rarely present in their lives. He would send money, make phone calls, promise to visit, but the visits never happened. He was a ghost in his own family. The same patterns that had started in his childhood, the abandonment, the feeling of not belonging, were repeating themselves. He was the one doing the abandoning now. In 2011, Dennis Rodman was inducted into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame. It was a moment of validation, a recognition that his career, with all its weirdness, was worthy of the highest honor in the sport. He wore a white suit with a pink shirt and a hat that looked like it had been borrowed from a circus ringleader. He gave a speech that was rambling, emotional, and surprisingly honest. He thanked his mother, his siblings, his coaches, and his teammates. He apologized for his mistakes. He said that he had never felt good enough, that he had always been trying to prove something, but that now, standing on that stage, he felt like he had finally made it. The audience gave him a standing ovation. For a few minutes, he was not the wild man. He was the kid from the projects who had overcome everything to become a champion. For a few minutes, the mask slipped, and the real Dennis Rodman was visible. But the mask always came back. After the Hall of Fame, he went right back to the life of partying and traveling and making headlines for all the wrong reasons. He appeared on Dancing with the Stars and was eliminated early. He got into a physical altercation with a paparazzo. He was arrested for speeding and driving on a suspended license. He continued to visit North Korea, even as tensions with the United States escalated. In 2017, during a trip to Pyongyang, he broke down and cried on CNN, pleading for peace, saying that President Trump and Kim Jong-un needed to talk. He seemed genuinely desperate, genuinely scared that the world was on the brink of war. He was trying to be a diplomat, but nobody took him seriously. They saw him as a sideshow, a distraction. And maybe that is what he had always been. A distraction from the pain, a distraction from the emptiness. He had spent his entire adult life trying to fill a hole that could never be filled. He had used basketball, women, alcohol, attention, even the love of a dictator, to avoid facing the truth about himself. The truth was that he was still that shy boy, that awkward kid who never quite fit in, who was always on the outside looking in. The truth was that he had never learned to love himself. He had learned to perform love, to demand attention, to command respect through fear and awe. But the real thing, the quiet connection that comes from being truly known, had always eluded him. In the years since his Hall of Fame induction, Dennis Rodman has faded from the public eye, at least in America. He still shows up at occasional events, still dyes his hair, still wears outrageous outfits, but the headlines are less frequent, the media less interested. He lives mostly in relative obscurity, passing time in a house that he bought with his NBA earnings, surrounded by memorabilia and memories. He is in his 60s now, a man who has lived 100 lives in one, a man who has been loved and hated and misunderstood and celebrated. He has made peace with some of his demons, but others still haunt him. He has spoken in interviews about wanting to reconnect with his children, to be a better father, but change is slow, and old habits are hard to break. There is a photograph that was taken of Dennis Rodman a few years ago at a public appearance. He is wearing a black leather jacket and his hair is dyed a shade of neon green. He is smiling, but the smile does not reach his eyes. His eyes look tired, hollow, like he has seen too much and felt too little. He is holding a basketball, but it is a prop, a reminder of a career that is long over. The man in that photograph is not the same man who crashed the boards in the 1990s. He is a ghost of that man, a shadow that still wears the costume but has lost the energy that gave it life. And yet, there is something about that photograph that is beautiful. It captures the fragility of a person who has spent his whole life pretending to be invincible. It captures the loneliness of a man who has been on a stage for so long that he has forgotten how to step off. This is where we are now, in the quiet aftermath of a storm that raged for decades. The headlines have moved on to other scandals, other clowns, other tragedies. But the story of Dennis Rodman is still here, still echoing in the empty arenas and the rehab centers and the homes of the children he never really knew. It is a story about the cost of being different, the price of being a wild rebound king in a world that demands conformity. It is a story about how sometimes the greatest victories are not the championships or the records, but the moments when you choose to keep living, even when everything inside you wants to die. Dennis Rodman made that choice many times. He is still making it day by day as he navigates a life that is quieter now, but no less strange. The wildness is still there, but it has been tamed by time and by the slow, painful work of trying to become a human being. He is still learning to fly, even as the ground keeps pulling him back. And we are still watching because his story is not just his story. It is a mirror held up to our own struggles, our own need to belong, our own desperate search for meaning in a world that often feels empty. And yet, even as the cameras pull back and the crowds thin, there are still moments when Dennis Rodman reminds the world why he was never just a curiosity. Every now and then, a story surfaces that cuts through the noise, a glimpse of the man beneath the paint. In a small gym in a suburb of Chicago, a high school basketball team was having a terrible season. They had lost 12 games in a row, and morale was so low that kids were skipping practice. The coach, a middle-aged man who had grown up watching the Bulls dynasty, had a crazy idea. He reached out to Rodman through a mutual acquaintance, not expecting a reply. A week later, Rodman showed up at the gym unannounced, wearing a wrinkled Bulls jersey and a hat that said Rebound. He did not give a speech. He did not pose for selfies. He simply grabbed a ball and started playing with the teenagers. He passed, he set screens, he encouraged them after missed shots. He stayed for 3 hours. The team won their next game, and the game after that. Some of the players later said that Rodman told them that losing was a choice, that they had to decide to be different. He told them that he knew what it felt like to be counted out, to be the last pick, to have everyone whisper that you were not good enough. He said that the only way to silence those whispers was to do something so loud that they had to pay attention. It was pure Dennis Rodman, recycled from 1,000 interviews but delivered in person in a sweaty gym to a group of kids who needed to hear it. And for a few hours, he was not a punchline. He was a coach, a mentor, a human being. That is the paradox that follows him everywhere. The same man who bought a motorcycle for a complete stranger in a bar was also the man who ignored his daughter's phone calls for 2 years. The same man who wept on national television about peace in Korea was the same man who taunted referees and got into fights with teammates. He was never one thing. He was a collage of contradictions, held together by duct tape and sheer will. And as his 6th decade began, those contradictions did not resolve. They simply deepened. He told an interviewer once that he had been diagnosed with a personality disorder but that he did not believe in labels. He said that he was just Dennis, and maybe that was the problem. Dennis was a hurricane, a force of nature that could not be controlled, only survived. In 2019, Rodman published a memoir, or rather, he collaborated with a writer to produce a book that was called I Should Be Dead by Now. The title was not a boast. It was a confession. In the book, he detailed his suicide attempts, his years of binge drinking, his reckless driving, his dangerous sexual encounters. He wrote about waking up in hospitals with no memory of how he got there. He wrote about the voices in his head that told him he was worthless. He wrote about the moment he decided to stay alive, not because he wanted to live, but because he was too stubborn to let the world win. The book was met with mixed reviews. Some praised its honesty. Others said it was just another spectacle. But for those who read it closely, it was a document of survival, a roadmap of a man who had walked through fire and come out scarred but still standing. One passage in particular stands out. He described a night in 1998, right after the Bulls won their sixth championship. He was alone in his hotel room, the trophy on the table, the champagne nowhere to be found. He had called his mother, but she did not answer. He had called a few friends, but they were all celebrating elsewhere. He sat on the floor holding the trophy and felt nothing. Not joy, not relief, just a vast, cold emptiness that seemed to swallow the room. He said that he realized then that championships could not fill the void. No amount of applause, no number of rebounds, no stack of money could patch the hole inside him. That night, he decided that he would never rely on basketball to make him happy again. He would find happiness in chaos, in movement, in the constant noise of being Dennis Rodman. And that is exactly what he did. For the next 2 decades, he ran from that hotel room, ran from the silence, ran from the reflection in the mirror. He ran all the way to North Korea, to the basketball courts of the Hermit Kingdom, where a dictator smiled and called him a friend. And even there, the emptiness followed. The relationship with Kim Jong-un is perhaps the most misunderstood chapter of his life. It was not a political alliance. It was not a betrayal of his country. It was a desperate grab for belonging. When Rodman walked into the dictator's palace, he was not Dennis Rodman, Hall of Fame basketball player. He was a lost boy looking for a father figure, an authority figure who would accept him without judgment. Kim Jong-un was powerful, charismatic, and most importantly, he seemed to genuinely enjoy Rodman's company. He laughed at his jokes, asked about his life, treated him as an equal. For a man who had spent his life feeling like an outsider, that acceptance was intoxicating. Rodman has said in interviews that he loves Kim Jong-un, not as a political leader, but as a person. He sees the humanity in him that the rest of the world refuses to see. This is not naivety. It is a reflection of Rodman's own need to see the good in others, because if he can see the good in a dictator, maybe he can see the good in himself. It is a tragic loop, a psychological trick that keeps him tethered to a relationship that damages his reputation and isolates him further. Meanwhile, back in the United States, his financial situation became precarious. The fortune he had earned from the NBA and endorsements had been mismanaged, spent on cars, houses, parties, and legal fees. He filed for bankruptcy in 2012, listing debts of nearly $1 million and assets of only a few $100,000. He had to sell his memorabilia, his championship rings, his jerseys. He even put his Hall of Fame ring up for auction at one point, though he later changed his mind. The money was gone, but the lifestyle remained. He continued to travel, to stay in hotels, to eat at expensive restaurants, hoping that the next appearance fee or autograph signing would cover the bills. It was a precarious existence, a tightrope walk over a canyon of debt. And yet he never stopped smiling for the cameras. He never stopped being Dennis Rodman. Because if he stopped, who would he be? In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic hit and the world shut down. For many celebrities, it was a time of reflection, of slowing down. For Rodman, it was a kind of prison. He could not travel. He could not attend events. He was stuck in his home in Newport Beach, California, a house that he had bought decades ago and never quite decorated. He spent the lockdown watching old games on television, drinking alone, calling old friends who did not always pick up. He later told a reporter that it was the loneliest year of his life. He said that he had not realized how much he relied on the constant motion, the noise of public life, to keep the darkness at bay. Without it, the silence was deafening. He started therapy over the phone with a counselor who specialized in addiction and trauma. He admitted that he had never dealt with the abuse he suffered as a child, the abandonment, the bullying. He said that he had just buried it all underneath the persona, but the persona was cracking. And what was underneath was a man who had been running for 60 years and was finally too tired to keep going. The pandemic also gave him time to reconnect with his children in a limited way. His son, Dennis Jr., was pursuing a basketball career, playing overseas and trying to make a name for himself. He had a daughter, Trinity, from a previous relationship who had grown up mostly without him. During the lockdown, Rodman made a conscious effort to call them more often, to listen rather than talk. He had conversations that went beyond the surface. Trinity said in an interview that her father was trying, that he was not perfect, but he was showing up in small ways. She said that she had learned to accept him as he was, because expecting him to be a conventional father would only lead to disappointment. It was a bittersweet reconciliation, the kind that happens when both sides have lowered their expectations and can meet in the middle. When the world reopened, Rodman slowly returned to the public eye, but the landscape had changed. The new generation of basketball fans knew him only as a legend from highlight reels, a name attached to a hair color. He was trotted out for nostalgia events, retro basketball camps, celebrity games. He signed autographs for a fee, posed for photos, told the same stories he had told 1,000 times. He was a living artifact, a relic of a forgotten era, but he still had the charisma, the strange magnetism that made people lean in. He still had the smile that could light up a room or freeze it solid. And he still had the pain buried deep, but always there, a low hum beneath the laughter. In 2022, a documentary about his life was announced. It would be produced by a major streaming service, with full access to his archives and his inner circle. Rodman agreed to participate, but he insisted on creative control. He wanted to tell his story his way, without sugarcoating. The documentary team followed him for a year, capturing his daily routines, his struggles, his rare moments of peace. They filmed him playing one-on-one against a teenager in a park, showing off moves that were still sharp, still wild. They filmed him sitting alone in his living room, staring at a wall of photographs from the Bulls era. They filmed him crying, apologizing, saying that he wished he had been a better father, a better brother, a better friend. The documentary, when it aired, was raw and uncomfortable. It did not try to rehabilitate his image. It showed him as he was, a broken man who had built a monument to his own pain and called it a life. Critics called it exploitative. Fans said it was brave. Rodman himself said he did not care. He had stopped caring about what people thought years ago. He had stopped trying to control the narrative. He was simply existing day by day, trying to find something that made the waking hours bearable. And in a strange way, that honesty was the most compelling thing about him. In a world of curated social media profiles and carefully managed reputations, Dennis Rodman was a raw nerve. He was so transparent that it hurt to look at him. He was a cautionary tale and a celebration of chaos all at once. As we think about his legacy, it is tempting to reduce him to a symbol. He is the eccentric star who danced with the devil and came out alive. He is the rebel who broke every rule and still won. He is the outcast who found a home in the NBA and then lost it again. But he is more than that. He is a reminder that greatness often comes at a terrible price. The same intensity that made him the best rebounder in history also made him unable to sit still, unable to be content, unable to find peace. He traded normalcy for legend, and he paid the difference with his sanity. The question is not whether it was worth it. The question is whether he had a choice. From the moment he was born into a broken family, from the moment he was told he was not good enough, the path was set. He could either fade into oblivion or burn so bright that the whole world had to look. He chose to burn, and the world is still looking. Even now, as he walks through airports and shopping malls, people stop and stare. They whisper, point, take pictures. They want a piece of him, a story to tell, a memory to hold. He gives it to them because that is what he has always done. He performs. He is a jester, a wizard, a warrior, a child. He is Dennis Rodman, and he is everything and nothing. He is the rebound king, the wild man, the human reminder that the game of life is not about following the rules. It is about making your own rules, even if they lead you to the edge of the abyss. He has been to the abyss and back many times. He is still here, still standing, still wearing the crown of thorns that he made for himself. There is a story that his old teammate Scottie Pippen tells from the 1997 NBA Finals. The Bulls were down by 2 points with seconds left. Michael Jordan had the ball, but he was double-teamed. Rodman, who had been on the bench with a sprained ankle, limped onto the court without permission. He grabbed an offensive rebound, kicked it out to Steve Kerr, and Kerr hit the game winner. After the game, Pippen asked Rodman why he did it. Rodman said, "Because I didn't want to lose and I knew I could get that ball." It was the perfect summary of his career. He did not care about the rules, the pain, the odds. He just wanted the ball. He wanted to win. He wanted to matter. And in that moment, he did. That impulse, that raw hunger, is what made him unforgettable. It is what made him, for a brief shining period, the most important player on the floor. It is what made him the weirdest, the loudest, the most impossible to ignore. And it is what will keep his story alive long after he is gone. Because every child who feels like an outsider, every teenager who is told they are too strange, every adult who is struggling to hold themselves together, will look at Dennis Rodman and see a possibility. If he can make it, maybe they can too. If he can be a champion while wearing purple hair and kissing a dictator, maybe they can find their own path through the madness. We are still watching, still waiting for the next chapter. But maybe there is no next chapter. Maybe this is it. A man in his 60s, living quietly, fighting his demons, accepting phone calls from his children, signing autographs at conventions, and occasionally making a trip to a country that is still a mystery to the rest of us. There is no redemption arc here, no tidy ending. There is only the slow, messy process of being alive. Dennis Rodman is still learning how to do that, and so are we. So let us not close the book yet. Let us keep the page open, because the story is not over. Every day that he wakes up, every time he chooses to stay, every rebound he grabs in his mind, he is writing another line. And we are reading it because it is our story too. The story of a boy who wanted to be seen, a man who could not stop running, and a legend who finally realized that the only way to win is to stop pretending. The wild rebound king is still out there, still spinning, still refusing to fall. And that, in the end, is the most beautiful thing of all. But perhaps the most fascinating chapter in the late phase of his life is the one he wrote on the international stage, far from the basketball court. In 2013, he made his first trip to North Korea, ostensibly for a basketball exhibition. The world watched in disbelief as the man who had once worn a wedding dress and dated Madonna sat next to Kim Jong-un, laughing, singing, and drinking. The photos were surreal. Here was a man known for his chaos, sitting next to one of the most controlled figures on earth. Critics called it a publicity stunt. Some called it treason. Rodman simply said he was building bridges. He said that sports could bring people together in a way that politics never could. And for a brief moment, he was taken seriously as a diplomat, a role he never asked for and clearly did not understand. He was a pawn in a larger game, but he did not care. He was having fun. He was doing what he always did, seeking connection, seeking attention, seeking something that felt real. The trips to North Korea became a recurring theme. He returned multiple times, always with a camera crew, always with a smile. He became a strange ambassador for a regime that the rest of the world condemned. And while many condemned him for it, he seemed genuinely unbothered. He saw the people he met, not the politics. He saw the kids playing basketball, the women dancing, the old men crying. He saw humanity in a place where humanity was often erased. It was naive, perhaps, but it was also pure. It was Dennis Rodman in his truest form, refusing to see the lines that everyone else drew, refusing to play by the rules that others set. He did not care about the consequences. He cared about the moment, the connection, the strange joy of being alive in a place where joy was scarce. In the years that followed, the documentary about his life premiered, and it changed the conversation around him. People who had dismissed him as a clown began to see the depth of his pain. The film showed his childhood, his sister's death, his mother's coldness, his father's absence. It showed the loneliness that stalked him even in the brightest moments of his career. It showed the alcohol, the pills, the tears. and it showed the aftermath, the slow grind of recovery, the quiet moments of grace. After the documentary aired, Rodman received an outpouring of support. Strangers reached out to him, sharing their own stories of trauma and addiction. He started to engage with them one at a time. He did not become a counselor or a public speaker. He just started responding to messages, sometimes with a simple emoji, sometimes with a phone call. He was not trying to save anyone. He was just reaching out, the same way he had always reached for a rebound. There was a particular moment captured by a fan on a smartphone from a small club in Los Angeles where Rodman was appearing for a signing. An elderly woman approached him, crying. She said that her son had died of an overdose and that she had watched the documentary with him just days before he passed. She said that her son had looked at her and said, "Mom, I understand now. I am not alone." The woman hugged Rodman and he hugged her back, holding on for a long time. He did not speak. He just held her. It was a moment that never made the news, never became a headline. It was just two broken people holding each other in a crowded room. And that, perhaps, was the truest work Rodman ever did. He has spoken rarely about his faith, but those close to him say that he prays. He prays for his children, for his friends, for the people he has hurt. He prays for the strength to stay sober for one more day. He does not go to church. He does not belong to any organized religion. He prays in his own way, sometimes on the basketball court in the middle of the night, sometimes alone in his kitchen. He says that God speaks to him through the game, through the sound of the ball bouncing, through the swish of the net. He says that he has made peace with his past, not because he has forgiven himself, but because he has accepted that he never will. And that acceptance, he says, is a kind of freedom. As we speak now, there are rumors of another comeback. A team owner has reached out about a part-time coaching position. Rodman is considering it. He misses the rhythm of a season, the grind of practice, the smell of the hardwood. He misses the locker room, the sound of sneakers squeaking, the inside jokes, the tension, the release. But he is afraid. Afraid that he will fall back into old habits. Afraid that he will disappoint. Afraid that he will leave again the way he always does. The people around him are divided. Some say he should stay away, protect his peace. Others say that the game is the only place where he feels whole and that he should go back to find himself. His daughter Trinity has become a rising star in the soccer world, playing for the U.S. women's national team. She has her own struggles with the weight of the Rodman name, but she has carved her own path. She does not shy away from talking about her father, but she does not romanticize him either. She says that she loves him, but she keeps her distance. She says that she has learned to separate the basketball legend from the man, and she says that the man, despite everything, is trying. He calls her on her birthday. He sends her messages before big games. He does not give advice. He just says he loves her. That is enough for now. Rodman lives alone in a modest house outside of Los Angeles. He has a small collection of cars, a few gold records from his rap album days, and a closet full of jerseys. He watches basketball obsessively. He calls games on television, analyzing rebounds and rotations with the same intensity he once played with. He has opinions about the modern game, about the way players shoot three-pointers instead of fighting for position. He says that the art of rebounding has been lost. He says that no one boxes out anymore. He says that they do not teach hunger. And he is right in a way. The game has changed, but the hunger remains. And so does he. There is a story that he tells when he is in a good mood about a game in Detroit when he was a rookie. He was matched up against Larry Bird. Bird was schooling him, hitting jumpers from every angle, talking trash. Rodman was frustrated, angry, ready to fight. But then he realized that he could not match Bird's skill, so he decided to match his intensity instead. He started to dive for loose balls to crowd Bird to make every touch a battle. By the end of the game, Bird had 35 points, but the Pistons won. Bird came up to him after the game and said, "You are a pain in the ass, kid. You play the right way." Rodman says that was the first time he felt like he belonged in the NBA. That feeling of belonging, of being accepted by a legend, stayed with him. It is why he kept playing, kept fighting, kept showing up even when his body was broken. It is why he still gets up every morning. He is still looking for that nod of approval, that recognition that he is doing it right, even if he never knows what right is. In the quiet hours of the night when the phone is not ringing and the cameras are gone, he sits in his living room and watches old tapes. He watches himself, younger, stronger, faster. He watches the way he moved, the way he flew through the air, the way he seemed to defy gravity. He watches the moments of triumph, the championships, the parades. He watches the moments of pain, the fights, the tears. He watches the faces of his teammates, the faces of his opponents, the faces of the crowd. He tries to remember what it felt like to be that person. He tries to find the thread that connects that boy to the man he is now. And sometimes, in the flicker of the screen, he sees it. He sees the family he built on the court. He sees the brothers who held him up. He sees the game that saved him, again and again. And that perhaps is the truest legacy of Dennis Rodman. Not the championships, not the headlines, not the chaos. But the fact that he is still here, still searching, still trying to understand the mystery of himself. He is a man who has been to the bottom and back, who has tasted the bitter ashes of his own destruction, and still found a reason to wake up in the morning. He is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the strange alchemy of pain and joy that makes us who we are. So let us end not with a conclusion, but with an image. The final scene of the documentary shows Rodman standing alone on an empty court in a gym in Chicago, the same gym where he used to practice with the Bulls. The lights are off except for a single spotlight. He is holding a basketball. He dribbles once, twice, then stops. He looks up at the rafters where the championship banners hang. He looks down at the floor where the ghost of his past still echoes. He takes a deep breath and then he shoots. The ball arcs through the air, hits the rim, bounces, and falls through the net. He does not celebrate. He does not smile. He just picks up the ball and walks away into the darkness. And that is Dennis Rodman, always moving, always searching, always grabbing for the next rebound, the next moment, the next chance to prove that he is still here. The wild rebound king, forever in motion, forever refusing to fall. There is no final chapter for a man like Dennis Rodman, only another page turning. And that is the truth about all of us, is it not? We are not stories that end neatly, tied up with a bow and filed away. We are ongoing, messy, contradictory drafts, edited and rewritten by time, by circumstance, by the choices we make in the dark. Rodman has spent his life being edited by the world, and he has spent his life editing himself, crossing out the lines that did not fit, scribbling new ones in the margins. He has been a villain and a hero, a clown and a sage, a cautionary tale and a miracle. He has been all of these things simultaneously, and none of them fully capture the whole. Perhaps the most honest thing we can say about Dennis Rodman is that he is a mirror. He reflects back whatever we project onto him. If you need a symbol of rebellion, he is there, with his hair dyed like a warning flag. If you need a symbol of redemption, he is there, standing in the ashes of his own life, refusing to be consumed. If you need a symbol of pain, he is there, a walking wound that never fully healed. He has carried the weight of our expectations, our judgments, our envy, and our pity. And through it all, he has kept moving because stopping would mean facing the silence that has always terrified him. The silence is the enemy. He has said that many times. When the noise stops, when the crowd goes home, when the phone stops ringing, that is when the demons come. That is when the loneliness sets in, the kind of loneliness that cannot be filled by any number of trophies or women or drinks. He has built his entire life around avoiding that silence, filling every moment with motion, with color, with chaos. But in recent years, he has begun to sit with it, just a little. He has begun to understand that the silence is not a void to be filled, but a space to be inhabited. He is learning slowly to be still. There is a photograph that surfaced a few years ago, taken by a friend on a quiet afternoon. Rodman is sitting on a bench overlooking the Pacific Ocean. He is not wearing any flamboyant clothes. He is just in a plain black t-shirt and jeans. His hair is gray, cropped short. His face is lined, weathered, peaceful. He is looking out at the water, and there is no trace of the wild man in his expression. He looks like a grandfather, a veteran, a man who has seen too much and survived anyway. The photograph went viral, not because of anything dramatic, but because of the stillness. People commented that they had never seen him like that before. They had never seen him at rest. That is the Dennis Rodman the world rarely gets to see. The one who wakes up early to watch the sunrise. The one who drinks black coffee and reads old sports columns about himself, marveling at the stranger he used to be. The one who calls his ex-teammates just to hear their voices, not to talk about basketball, but to say thank you. He has made amends with some of the people he hurt, though not all. Some wounds are too deep, and he knows that. He carries the guilt of those unreconciled relationships like a stone in his pocket. He does not try to put it down, he just carries it. And yet for all the pain, there is a lightness to him now that was absent in his younger years. He laughs more easily. He jokes about his own mistakes. He tells stories of his wildest nights with a kind of bemused detachment, as if he is talking about a character in a movie. He has learned to separate himself from his past, not by denying it, but by owning it. He says, I did those things. I was that person. But I am not that person anymore. And the proof is in the living, in the quiet choices he makes every day to stay sober, to stay kind, to stay present. His relationships with his children remain complicated, but they are relationships nonetheless. He talks to Trinity regularly, and he has begun to build a bond with his son, who was born during his years with the Bulls. He is not the father he wishes he could be, but he is the father he is capable of being right now. He shows up when he can. He listens. He says, I love you. For a man who once seemed incapable of emotional intimacy, that is a monumental achievement. It is a rebound of the heart. In the end, the story of Dennis Rodman is not a story about basketball. It is a story about what it means to be human. It is about the struggle to find meaning in a world that often seems meaningless. It is about the fight to be seen, to be loved, to be understood. It is about the courage to keep going when every part of you wants to give up. He has given up many times and he has come back many times. That is the pattern of his life, the rhythm that defines him. He falls and he gets up. He falls again and he gets up again. He is the rebound king because he never stays down. As the lights dim on this episode, we leave him where we found him, in the gym on the court with a basketball in his hands. The game is still his sanctuary, his church, his home. He will keep playing in some form until his body gives out. And even then he will find a way, because Dennis Rodman does not know how to quit. He only knows how to reach, to grab, to hold on. And in that relentless grip there is a lesson for all of us. Hold on to what matters. Hold on to the people who love you. Hold on to the moments of grace, no matter how fleeting. And if you fall, fall forward, because there is always another rebound waiting. So thank you for listening to this story, the story of the wild rebound king. His journey is not over. It never will be. He is still out there somewhere, chasing the next ball, the next headline, the next chance to prove that he is alive. And as long as he is moving, we will be watching, because in his chaos we see a reflection of our own, and in his resilience we find hope for our own.